So, do you have an idea how to anticipate the situation? Thank you.
So for the first question, I definitely agree with you that if you want to actually look at education and health outcomes, so like educational attainment, immunizations in these areas, that's going to tell you more about like changes in actually human capital. And so I wish I had access to that kind of data to make that estimation, but I don't. So that's why I just look at health and education spending. Yeah. So, but I'm happy to talk about that later with you. And so, to answer your question about environmental costs, so I don't really perform any estimations about like environmental impact. I just kind of I think it's important to motivate the study because it's really relevant to people in Indonesia and also for like deciding what to do in terms of policy. So I think it just contributes to that debate, but really my research doesn't directly talk about the environmental impact.
I'm Nirwan from the ILO Jakarta. The first question related with did you also look at the macro level of the impact of price, which, for example, this conclusion relate with the very micro at the household level, but also do you look at the macro level how the price impact is really improving Indonesian income, for example, and then in average it is mentioned as a economic value for Indonesia. And then the second one is also related with you also analyze the impact throughout the value chain. For example, if your conclusion is that there is a effect of boom and bust with the household expenditure, and how about with the entire sectors? For example, just an assumption whether or not, because if there is a problem, then we could next analyze all the effect throughout the sectors. For example, if there is a bottleneck that of influencing the household in getting more benefit from the house from the price boom, for example, like that. Thank you.
So for the first question, definitely, I mean, at the aggregate level, a price boom is going to bring in a lot of export revenue. So I know like palm oil itself is about like 10% of Indonesian exports in terms of value. But I mean, that's something that's easy to observe and easy to like measure. You just look at how much you export relative to the price. But I think what I'm doing here is looking at how much of that aggregate revenue at the macro level actually reaches the micro level. And so, I mean, like a macroeconomic study would be something like quite different. And no, I don't look at the value chain. But definitely that's another interesting research topic. So.
Thank you. Second question.
Hi, Peter Riddlecar from Reality Check Approach, Palladium. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Is it, I know you said it was aggregated at district level and you can't look too much deeper within there, but would it be possible to try and dig a little bit of variations between households? And in particular, if there's variations between, say, the middlemen and families who may be more or less connected to the actual market prices. But some of the studies that we've found was that the poorer families are less connected to market fluctuations, and so you could hypothesize that the middlemen are actually taking more of the income when the market goes up, and then if the price comes down, then they're pushing that back down onto poorer families.
Yeah, so the reason I look at the average in a district is that in Susanas you can't identify which households produce palm oil. You just know their sector of employment, like if they're in agriculture. So no, I wouldn't be able to look at like middlemen versus palm oil producers. That would require like a different data set. But it's definitely something to take into account. So, my advisor works pretty intensively in Southeast Asia. So, when I was choosing a topic, I knew that I wanted to work in Southeast Asia. And I initially kind of landed on Indonesia from actually looking at deindustrialization, so kind of the stagnant or decline in manufacturing in Indonesia, and also the stagnation in the real wage. And so I was going to look at that through the framework of like a resource curse, but not just palm oil, looking at like agricultural and other commodities. So a previous version of this paper had been looking at like the fossil fuel production as well across Indonesia, and trying to look at the differences between those two types of commodities. But the reason I landed on palm oil is, one, I thought it was a much more unique topic. It's something that hadn't been studied before, and I thought that it would really fit well in the literature. And I mean, palm oil is just so unique in Indonesia because it expanded so rapidly. It's such an important part of the economy, and I think it's a really important topic to study. It impacts the livelihoods of a lot of people.
Related to, is there any changes between districts when the first is the producers, like the category is changes between years, like from the producer then they become the non-producer? Is there any threshold for the producers?
Yeah, so the producer variable is you are classified as a producer if you ever produce palm oil. And so I realized in this category, it's I'm going to be including really small producers, but it really that would just downward bias the results. So you're going to be including districts in there that really aren't going to respond to the palm oil price change in terms of household expenditure. So I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Allison, for a very interesting presentation. I have two questions or comments. The first one, I'm a bit puzzled by your third limitations that you didn't take into account CPI. Do you really only use nominal household expenditure data from Susanas?
Yes.
So, what does it mean? I mean, because with the nominal expenditure, we cannot really say anything about welfare effect, for example, from the boom and bust on household welfare. Secondly, I also did not really agree with your conclusions on poverty because you only take into account the average income, average expenditure, and hence we don't really know whether what happened to the poor or to the people at the lower distribution. Because it may be that all that happens, the increase and the decrease in expenditure only happens at the middle class and upper level segment of population, and nothing happened to the poor, for example.
So I think it's okay that I don't take into account CPI changes. So, well, first it's going to control for with the district fixed with the year fixed effects. It controls for changes in CPI at the national level. So definitely if it's something that's happening like regionally over time, it's not something I'm taking into account.
So you take into account CPI, but the national CPI. So you use CPI, but only the national CPI.
No, I don't use CPI, but because I use time trends, I control for any time trend. So if like the CPI is rising over time, it's going to be absorbed by that year fixed effect, so it should take that into account. But if a region is their CPI is changing over time at a rate that's like different than all of the districts, than the national level, then that could be a problem. But I don't imagine that the CPI is going to fall that much. I mean, if anything, it's going to be increasing over time. So since I am looking at nominal expenditures, so an increase maybe like, I mean, it might bias like the boom estimates, but in terms of the bust estimates, it might bias those upwards. But the bust estimates, it would bias them upwards, which would help because if your CPI is increasing, but we still see that your expenditure is falling, that means like your real consumption, your real expenditure is falling by more. So, sorry, what was your other question? Oh, about poverty? Oh, yes. Yeah, so, I mean, the thing with looking at the distribution within a district is that I think that's like a little bit more troublesome because you might have the poor like moving between districts. There might be like changes in terms of like the distribution of the population, but I think if you look at the average expenditure, it indicates better what's happening for the whole district. So, I mean, an extension of this work could look at like inequality, or like just look at expenditure for the top 20% or the bottom 10%. But I think that does have like a little bit, I would be a little bit more worried about some bias due to like migration between districts, or maybe like people falling in and out of the same, like, yeah. But I mean, it's definitely an extension of the work that you could do. But I mean, what I'm showing is that on average, this is what is happening in these districts.
We have a last questions from those who's watching online. The question is from Nadi. What is your policy recommendations on sustainability in farm oil sector, especially for the smallholder?
So, by sustainability, do you mean environmental sustainability?
Yeah. Good.
Okay. So that's not really my area of research. I think that's something I'd have to think about more. But I mean, in terms of my results, if you wanted to protect smallholders more in terms of seeing what happens to household consumption, then you'd have to do something to insulate them more from price shocks. So maybe like more access to savings, access to credit to smooth consumption over time could be something that would help.
So I think we come to the end of today's sessions. Is there any things that you would like to share with us?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming. I'm happy to talk with everyone afterwards. This is going to be my job market paper. It's still a work in progress, so any suggestions and advice that you have, I'm happy to talk about it, and I'd be very grateful. So thank you for coming.
Okay. Thank you, Allison. Today's presentations will be sent through individual emails, so please make sure that you write your email address correctly and clearly. And we are pleased to have Allison here today, and for that seminar we have a thankful gift for Allison that will be presented by Asek as the Director of Seminar Research Institute. SMERI still hosts one last FKP sessions on Tuesday, 31st October of 2017. The presenter is Mayang Rizky, who will present her latest study on corruptions, governance, and inequality. So if you are interested on corruptions and inequality, then we are welcome you to Tuesday FKP sessions. On behalf of SMERI, thank you for being here and participating in today's FKP. Thank you.